The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
This is Gerard with episode number 42 of Florida's Fresh Mix on the Florida Podcast Network, a random mix of Florida's freshest personalities. Listen in, y'all.
What is up, Fresh Mixers? Welcome to Florida's Fresh Mix podcast. My name is Amortegui, and I am the lead content producer of the Florida Podcast Network. Of course, who else would be here with me other than your host, Gerard? Gerard, what's good?
Nothing. It's about what's great. That we have a special guest. Who's our guest this week, Amber?
Well, you know him way better than I do because he's your bestie. We have your bestie on the show today, Gerard, and shame on you for getting him on the 42nd episode. Okay.
Well, I wanted to establish some what would be the podcast version, so some podcast cred before inviting him on the show. I'm just so happy. This was such a great opportunity, and you know he is my bestie, but at the same time, I learned stuff about him that I did not know before, because, you know, our friendship is based less on, you know, what he does, you know, during his workday, and more on, let's just say, quote unquote, other stuff. So, yeah.
It's more personal, not so business. And you guys talked a lot of business today.
Well, technically, I am his attorney, and I've done legal work for the companies that we're going to be talking about. But I haven't gone as in depth with respect to particularly the background of how these companies came to be, as we did in this interview. So my friends are, I'm so blessed. My friends are doing big things, and I learned even more about what Josh is doing. And so, you know, I just love that kid, man. Like, anyway, I'm not gonna gush too much. Tell them about Josh. Who is Josh? Because I'm gonna brag too much if I do it.
All right, people. We have on the show today Josh Powe. He is the co-founder and executive chairman of LinkIt, which is a platform that collects and uses students' data to enhance academic achievement. He's also the founder of Publi, which is a company that produces digitally interactive children's books. Super, super cool. You guys dove into both of those companies and his experience in the world of education. Now, this might be the first guest who is not a Floridian right now, but he was like 15 years ago. And he started LinkIt due to Florida's, let's just say, less than impressive public school system. And I can say that because I was in the public school system for like 8 or 9 years.
I'm sensing some angst, some PTSD, Amber.
Just a little. Listeners, if you are around my age, which is like somewhere in the mid-20s, I guess, you might be familiar with a little standardized test called the FCAT. Dun dun dun.
The FCAT plays prominently in this interview, and you know, it's something I am completely unfamiliar with. So, and Amber is clearly very familiar with. Much
triggered.
To her chagrin. Yes,
I'm triggered. But it's super fascinating, you know, just to hear his perspective on the FCAT. And there's no longer FCATs, just for listeners out there who might be thinking like, is that even a thing anymore? It's not, but there's an equivalent, and you guys get into all of those things. It's really fascinating, and just the services that both of his companies provide for students, teachers, parents, school districts all across the country, all over the world. Good stuff. Really good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and aside from him being my close friend, also we're talking about two topics that are near and dear to my heart. One is entrepreneurialism and taking a concept into reality, and also the kids, because you know what? When Josh wakes up in the morning, everything he does, whether it's LinkIt or Publi, is for the kids. It's for the kids.
Yes, Gerard, it's all about the kids. And speaking of the kids, Gerard, tell the people about this special organization that you're involved with that has to do with helping the kids.
Oh, thank you so much, Amber, for that segue. As our devoted Fresh Mixers already know, for the past 3 years, I've proudly served on the board of directors of Guitars Over Guns. GoGo is an incredibly impactful nonprofit organization that offers students from disadvantaged communities in Miami, Chicago, and Los Angeles a powerful combination of music education and strong mentoring relationships with professional musicians to help them overcome hardship, find their voice, and reach their potential as tomorrow's leaders. Please head to the show notes for more information and, most importantly, to donate. Don't make me beg, but I'm happy to beg. It's for the kids.
Do the right thing. Donate your money to this great organization. Like Gerard said, you can find the link in the show notes. It's always there.
There you go. So without delay, let's talk about what's best for the kids and head into this episode.
All right. This is Josh Powe, the co-founder of LinkIt and the founder of Publi, sitting down with his bestie, Gerard.
My dog. Okay, Fresh Mixers, this is a first in more ways than one. So I have interviewed people that I know before, but not someone that really knows me nearly as well as this dude. This guy might know me better than anyone else on the planet other than my family. And it's Joshua Powe, one of my closest friends of all time. We went to school together and we'll get into how we met and all that good stuff. But first of all, I just want to welcome Josh to the Fresh Mix. Thanks a lot, buddy.
No problem, Gerard. Happy to be here.
All right. You might be happy now, but let's see how long that lasts. Because don't worry, I'm going to try to tamp down my ignorance level to like an 8.
That'd be most appreciated. Thank you.
Well, listen, no, in all seriousness, we're going to end up talking about some very serious and important Florida-related topics and topics involving education and otherwise. But first of all, Josh is an entrepreneur. He's an education expert. He's the founder and CEO of LinkIt, and I will let him explain to you what LinkIt does. I understand what it is, but I'd rather hear it from the horse's mouth. And also another company called Publi, which produces interactive stories and children's books for kids, mostly, kind of somewhat older, maybe 7 to 12. But we'll get more into that later. I want to talk to Josh to pick his brain about education, and he's very well versed in the Florida FCAT system and the challenges there, and so many other things. Being an entrepreneur, he's just got a wealth of knowledge and experience that I'd like for the audience to glean. So, having said all that, Josh, how did we meet?
Well, as you may recall, Gerard, you and I met freshman year of college at Harvard University. I can't recall whether we were in the same dorm or not. I believe the answer is yes, right? Were we in the same dorm?
Not only were we both in Thayer, in the yard, Harvard Yard.
Yeah,
we were both on the same floor. I think we were both on the 4th floor, and your roommate was Ray, and then I had 2 roommates, Brian, and I think his name was maybe Mike or something. But anyway, yeah. So I think we were actually even on the same floor.
Yeah, I do. I do recall that. I assume that's not the particular connection that you're talking about. Is that?
It's an open question. I mean, I don't. My mind is kind of foggy as to the first time we actually spoke. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, look. I mean, I remember one of our early interactions. Whether it was truly the first or not, I don't know. But was at a meeting of what was either the Black Men's Forum or the Black Students Association. I can't recall which, but as a light-skinned brother myself, I typically stood out in that crowd. And I do remember you approaching me and, in effect, asking what my motivation was for being there.
Well, in my defense, I was thinking to myself, wow, what what a great guy. I keep seeing him at these events. What an ally. That's good people. I'm going to go up and talk to him.
Yeah, that's right. And talk to me, you did. And I think your opening salvo was something like, or what is your deal? Are you just a white guy that's down for the cause, or what's up with this? And how concerned should I be that you're a spy? I don't know, something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing.
Well, it's funny because I vividly remember my exact words were, "Listen, man, no offense, but are you black, man?"
Right.
And you laughed, and not in a very amused way. But yeah, so we weren't immediate fast friends. Basically, all the brothers and sisters at Harvard knew each other to some degree, and we obviously knew each other. But I think that our friendship really started to be more solidified, like junior and senior year, and then afterwards you moved to Florida. So this is the Florida Fresh Mix. So I would like to have our audience understand, because your Florida connection, how long you were here, but the Florida connections go even further than you just living here for a number of years. It also kind of inspired, it's the origin of LinkedIn, et cetera. So we'll get into all that, but tell us how long you lived in Florida. How did you end up here in the first place?
Yeah, so I moved to Florida from New York in around about 2002, and I was living in South Beach, not far from you, and certainly we had quite a number of interactions at that time. But the total time I was in Florida was really from about 2002 to 2008 or so. And at the time, I was working for a publishing company that was founded by my parents, and it was a sort of one of the first sort of fully Black-owned publishing companies that was serving K-12 school systems and building out customized programs in reading and math to meet the state standards. And we were doing, as a company, a lot of work in Florida at the time. So it was my role to interface with the school systems, not only to sort of act as an ambassador for the company's products, but also to be very involved in training teachers and administrators in terms of how to use the various programs, how to think about the data that was being collected from those programs, and ultimately how to maximize student achievement as it pertained to kind of progress in those curriculum solutions that the company was creating and bringing to market.
I actually never knew the answer to that question, which is what brought you to, why did you come to Florida in the first place? I wasn't cocky enough to think it had anything to do with me. I guess. I was
going to say, it wasn't just to hang out with you, Gerard. I know that may be hard to believe.
So it sounds to me like you would have taken this on and come to Florida regardless of whether I've been here or not. So it's a little humbling to hear that, but all right, that's fine. It adds more legitimacy to your Florida connection for the podcast. So that's great.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Florida was certainly one of the states that the company was most actively involved in working with. There were a number of large school districts, including Miami-Dade and Hillsborough County in particular, where the company had active contracts and was collaborating with the schools to essentially create these customized curriculum solutions.
Now, tell me, what did you see as kind of the challenges in the Florida educational system, and how does LinkIt solve those types of challenges? And tell us about LinkIt in general, and then we can get more specific into challenges in Florida.
Sure. So LinkIt is a data analytics and assessment platform, and a company that I feel very fortunate to play the role of co-founder and also now executive chairman of the company. Really started round about the time that I was in Florida working with schools specifically. And essentially what the company does, and I'll just back up a little bit before I get to the kind of Florida origin story, is we build analytic systems that are designed to help schools collect and analyze their data. And by data, I mean things like student assessment scores, grades, attendance records, student behavioral records, and ultimately tying that back to sort of their teachers and their schools as a whole. And what we're trying to do as a company is to make data more accessible to the various stakeholders and improve student achievement, based on the idea that the more educators know about where students are in their learning journey, the more that journey can be customized to reflect a more student-centric approach. So really what we're trying to do is to help partner with schools so they can get away from a kind of one-size-fits-all model of education, to really allow them to shape and customize the learning journey to meet the needs of individuals.
And it sounds to me it's more of a holistic throughout the year approach, as opposed to, focusing on teaching to one test during the year, which, creates its own set of challenges. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. So one of the problems that sort of initially was a catalyst towards me building what ultimately became LinkIt was really something that I saw working with schools at the time every day, this sort of disconnect when it came to what do students kind of understand, what are they being held accountable for during the school year through their various textbooks and the curriculum itself, versus what ultimately was assessed at the end of the year. At that time, the assessment was called the FCAT in Florida, and it was notoriously difficult. So you had a situation where high-performing students that might be the equivalent of B+ or A- or even A students were really struggling when it came to performing well and passing the FCAT at the end of the year. So I had to attend a lot of meetings, whether it was community meetings or Board of Ed meetings, where parents, quite understandably, were looking for explanations and trying to seek a deeper understanding of what led to this situation. How could their child or their children that were performing well throughout the year all of a sudden get to the end of the year and not be able to even perform at the most basic levels of proficiency on the FCAT? Where ultimately had the system failed? And that was the question that I think I was trying to answer. I certainly wasn't alone in trying to answer it or help schools answer it at the time. But the genesis of LinkIt was really that, which is essentially, how do you create an early warning system so that students can get multiple exposures to the kind of assessments and the rigor, the challenge that was really truly on grade level, that reflects what they're ultimately going to be held accountable for at the end of the year. And that effort or that challenge was really sort of the genesis of what became LinkIt, essentially a technology platform that would allow teachers to collect data throughout the year on a weekly or monthly basis if they wanted to, based on assessments that were truly challenging and rigorous for students, so that there was no sort of false sense of security. And ultimately, that system that we created has now spread to hundreds of school districts across the United States, certainly well outside of Florida, even as far away as Australia and Guam.
Wow. Okay. So now I'm going to have to admit something. I know very little about the FCAT. I've never taken it. As you know, my producer Amber was mentioning to me that even the mere mention of FCAT brought back so many bad memories. She's got like PTSD about taking the FCAT back in the day, which, she's a lot younger than us. So back in the day isn't as far back in the day. To be honest, I mean, I had to explain to her that I never took the FCAT. I know it's a standardized test. I assume I don't know what the purpose of it is. I don't, I assume it's something kind of like the SAT, but I never had to take it because I've only been in public school for 1 week of my entire life, which is a whole whole different story. But I've been in private school. I never had to take the FCAT. So first of all, does it still exist? And what's the purpose of it?
Well, I guess the answer is yes and no, as far as does it still exist. It's no longer called the FCAT, but Florida, like many states, still does have what is called a summative assessment. And a summative assessment is something that is typically mandatory in public school settings. And it's the primary way that various stakeholders, let's say, come to understand whether the curriculum is working ultimately throughout the state, and whether students, their teachers, and the schools that those students and teachers are enrolled in or work for are ultimately achieving the requisite level of progress throughout the year. So in other words, are students really getting a year's worth of learning gains for a year spent in the school's educational environment? And the summative assessment, whether it's the FCAT or under any other name, is really the primary instrument that is designed, at least in theory, to give a measure of that sort of degree to which schools are performing at the level that they need to be performing at, as sort of agreed to by and adopted by state legislatures and so on. So I believe that the current Florida assessment, I think it has a more generic sounding name. I think it's the Florida Standards Assessments, but the premise is really fundamentally the same. Is essentially, as I said, are students meeting that bar that's been established by the state for proficiency across the standards? In other words, the curriculum expectations, the learning expectations that have been established and theoretically implemented across all public schools in the state.
And were you able to, compile the data and figure out your initial query, which was, how could someone who's B+, A- student do so poorly on these standardized Florida tests? Is there more visibility?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the things that we found quite early on in that work was that a lot of the sort of grades and the sort of softer measures of student learning were, quite frankly, inflated, right? And not necessarily based on sort of a purposeful campaign or sort of a conspiracy to inflate student grades. But the simple fact was the level of rigor that students were being assessed on or judged by was different than what the expectations were on the FCAT at the time. In other words, the FCAT was a much harder assessment, a much tougher test. And therefore, students could do reasonably well in their coursework and, let's say, other smaller assessments like a unit test or a quiz or a chapter test at the end of a chapter in their textbook. They could essentially ace that test while still ultimately not really being prepared for the level of questioning that they ultimately would have to encounter on the FCAT. And that caused a real disconnect. So I think in large part, it really was a question of rigor. And I think what we also came to understand, and this is something harder to prove, but easy to speculate about, was that it seemed that the textbook publishers, the makers of the curriculum materials, also, in a sense, had a vested interest in keeping their own assessments, let's say that unit test that I talked about, relatively easy, because that created the perception that students were learning. And learning as a result of being exposed to the textbook from a particular company, right? So again, not to breathe too much life into conspiracy theories here, but it was clear that there was sort of a misalignment of incentives where you had textbook publishers that were for profit and driven to maximize shareholder profits, which ultimately means selling more books, versus ultimately a state accountability framework where the goal was to have kids that maximize their educational potential. And the sort of assessment component of those two disparate goals or initiatives was not well aligned. And those publishers, in effect, had an incentive to make their assessments relatively easy because that continued to feed the perception that their materials were working very well for students, when in fact, according to the bar set by the state, that was not the case.
Is your job to merely provide data or also to provide solutions? Like if I were to ask a stupid question, it seems to me that if the grades that kids are getting in school are misaligned with their scoring on the FCAT, someone like me who knows nothing about education would just say, well, you either got to make the FCAT easier or the school curriculum more rigorous. And, I think that's just like a super simplistic, and I wouldn't even call it a solution, but maybe an approach. But does LinkIt play a role doing anything solutions-based as opposed to providing the data?
Well, I think that's a really, really good question. And in some ways, We believe that the data is the solution. And essentially, you could rephrase that to say knowledge is power. That ultimately is sort of our philosophy, where we're trying to, as a company, remain relatively agnostic about exactly what schools should do with the data.
Right, that's what I'm driving at. Yeah,
we certainly have ideas. So I think part of the solution is, again, having this kind of a mechanism to have an early warning system. Back in that era, when I was working in Florida, people often used to say that the FCAT is kind of like an educational autopsy in a way. And what they meant by that, despite the sort of gross metaphor, is that by the time you got that data, which typically took several months to process, that data was no longer useful to educators because those kids that the data pertained to had either already been held back or were essentially socially promoted. And in any case, were no longer in those teachers' classes. Right. So the data got stale really quickly. It was no longer actionable at the individual student level without sort of a lot of heavy lifting and work. And ultimately, that wasn't the purpose of the assessment. So when we think about solutions on the LinkIt side, we really are trying to empower educators with more timely access to relevant data that is based on rigorous assessments. And that goes to your point about making the curriculum, making the sort of instructional materials, the daily work, the daily lessons that students are exposed to more challenging, more rigorous, more engaging, ultimately based on the idea that will lead to better outcomes on the FCAT or any standardized assessment without having to teach to the test as such.
Okay, that makes sense. And now, you saw an issue, you saw a problem. What it sounds like to me is it didn't come to you in a dream, right? You were out there and you were talking to people. Then you said, I need to start a company to deal with this. Explain how you actually physically did it. Because to my knowledge, you're not, some data, I don't know, for lack of a better term, data gathering expert. I don't know. Maybe you are. I have no idea. You're smart as hell. So I'm just saying you saw an issue and you're just like, people don't just wake up and say, okay, I'm going to start a company. And then the company is just there. Okay. How did you actually make it happen? Help me inspire some folks to understand what it actually takes to bring something from concept to actual existence.
Well, I imagine, like many such stories, Gerard, the truth is probably messier and less elegant than sort of the fictionalized aspect of it, or the sort of romanticized aspect of starting a company.
We don't need to know how all the sausage is made and give up any proprietary secrets, right? I'm just saying.
Yeah. So, but as you said, it wasn't sort of a one-time epiphany. I didn't have the idea in a dream or in the shower, and just decided that I absolutely had to do that thing ultimately, which became LinkIt. It came out of my experience in the trenches, and I think if anything, I'm sort of a relentless problem solver. And I try to, when I see issues or whether it's inefficiencies or people really struggling with aspects of their sort of daily work, or whether it's or it doesn't have to be work necessarily, it could be personal things. Those are things that I try to address. And I've always had an interest in technology for as long as I can remember, but I'm not a coder. So to your point, I couldn't conjure LinkIt up out of the ether, but I felt that I had a clear enough idea at the time to engage other more competent, more skilled people that would help me build what initially became LinkIt. So I hired some developers initially and was exploring different concepts for how I wanted to create this platform. Ultimately, I partnered with a developer that was a little further along the way with what he was doing, was able to collaborate with him and grow the technology platform, expand its feature set, really create something that was a very robust and enterprise-grade platform for schools to use. And that evolved over time. So I certainly also came to the understanding that unlike, let's say, I don't know, writing a book, for example, where you essentially have that kernel of an idea, you commit pen to paper or, type it, of course, on computer these days, but you essentially start, you go through your chapters, you finish the book, and it's done. building software systems, very different than that. It really is an ongoing process, and the best systems are never done. They're constantly evolving and changing and improving, ideally based on user feedback. And that really was, I think, the hallmark of some of our early success at LinkIt, as well as the sort of continued journey that we went on, is the sort of relentless listening to end users. What do they want? What do they need? How do we make data easy to understand for teachers and for administrators, while still making it powerful, making it insightful, making it deep? So really wanting to kind of establish a mechanism to make the data accessible without sort of dumbing it down, while still really showing what is possible. Why should anybody even care about data? And that's something that we've invested a lot of time and thought into, and really, I think, has kind of defined us from the very beginning, when I kind of said, look, this is a problem that I'm committed to solving. I'm going to put the right people around me to help me do that, and just learn from our mistakes. Certainly that humility is a big part of it as well. You always have to kind of, as the expression goes, fail forward. So if you're going to make a mistake, you want to learn from that mistake, and ultimately that propels you to the next step.
And what I'm hearing from you is, kind of highlights something that I say all the time, which is, know what you know and know what you don't know. And you just mentioned humility, which is right along those lines. So you have to build the right team. So if you were to give advice to people, how concerned do you think people need to be if they're starting a business about getting the right team off the bat? Or do you see it more like the NBA, where the owners are trying to get the right players, but they switch them in and out as they go along to try to, create the best team over time, right? I mean, how concerned do you think that people need to be to get it right the first time?
That's an interesting one. I'll answer it like this. I don't know that there's a right answer there, because sometimes you need to make forward progress. You don't always have the luxury of having a team of all-stars. That being said, having A players on your team is better than the alternative. You just don't always have that luxury. And I think, if I were to sort of broadly give guidance on that, I would say, don't let sort of the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? Like if you have good in hand, you feel like you've got a good team that can propel you forward, that may be good enough. You don't have to be blocked by the fact that there are imperfections, or that you don't have every single role filled that you feel like you need to be successful. That typically comes over time. And as you gain more success, obviously you have more influence, you've got more resources, you become a more attractive company for people to work for. So I would say that you don't necessarily need to have an all-star team right from the beginning, but you do want to think very carefully about that team composition, particularly anyone that you're going to go into partnership with. You really want to make sure that you've got the right partners, that you don't give away your equity in your company too quickly, or at least until partners have proven themselves to you over time.
And by partners, folks, sorry to interrupt, but by partners, folks, this is the corporate lawyer coming out. We are talking equity, meaning people you give ownership of your business to, shares, however you want to put it. Okay. So I always tell my clients that's the last thing you want to give away. And when you give it away, it better be to a person who damn well deserves it, and for a damn good reason. So anyway, go on.
I think that's right. It's easy to give it away. It's hard to take it back. So you got to make the right decisions there.
That's right. That's right. Great advice. Great advice. Okay. So listen, you must have done something right. I mean, LinkIt works. I mean, you started the company around 2004. LinkIt is currently working with over 450 school districts around the country. You're working with customers not only in the United States, but around the world. So it's, as far away as Australia. So that's quite an accomplishment. Did you expect that idea you had so many years ago, to be, this widespread and this successful?
I think in some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. I mean, at the time, LinkIt didn't have a lot of competitors. Now, I think, as I said, I wasn't the only one to see this gap in the marketplace, and to kind of come up with the idea that if teachers had access to better assessments and better data, they could ultimately be better advocates for their students, and better guides along that educational journey. while if I didn't think LinkIt could become important, I wouldn't have started it. So in some ways, the answer is yes. I always imagined that I could build something that would matter. But as far as the specifics of it, that we would be working with hundreds of school districts and some as large as 1 million students and in these far-flung places across the world, that's not something I thought of, 15 years ago. It really was beyond what I was reasonably able to foresee.
Excellent. And I don't want to dwell too much on the answer to this next question, but I have to ask because it's pretty obvious. With all of the in-home learning that had to take place during COVID, how did that create challenges for your business?
Well, I think, to be honest, it probably created a lot greater challenges for schools and parents than it did for our business. Our business remained fairly stable during that time. There was still a lot of interest in data, particularly because students were now at home, disconnected by and large from their schools, from their teachers. So there was certainly an interest in trying to get more transparency and understand how students were progressing in those years or in that time frame where they were largely outside of the school building. So that was really an unprecedented challenge for school systems to have to undertake. But they were also concerned with how do we get the basics of the sort of instructional delivery to students via remote. In some cases, schools were responsible for making sure students had lunch, right, and had meals if those students met certain criteria. So these were really big time issues, mission critical issues. Data, I think, supported the ability of teachers and administrators to be more effective. And ultimately, that was a good thing for us as a company, a net positive. There was also a lot of interest in understanding and quantifying what the impact of being at a school actually was on student learning. And that's an area where we were able to provide, I think, a lot of support for the school districts that we were working with by customizing data analytics and reporting so that they could actually measure what the impact was on student learning for that time spent out of school. And certainly, as I think everybody well knows, there were a lot of very real challenges there with respect to being able to keep pace with sort of pre-pandemic results and learning gains.
Did you see any increases in the demand for your services during the pandemic because of these challenges?
I wouldn't say that. I don't think that we were, specifically a beneficiary of the pandemic, like maybe Zoom, the sort of
or Amazon
software, or Amazon. That's just not kind of what we do. So I think that it wasn't that we specifically benefited from it. I think we were happy to play a supporting role to the school districts that we were working with as they sort of tried to navigate what data sets were most important, how were they going to be accountable to their students and other stakeholders, how were they going to report to their boards of education, their communities with respect to what was actually going on, with respect to kind of so-called learning loss as a result of the pandemic. And I think we wouldn't necessarily perceive it as loss, but certainly a slower pace of progress when compared with historical norms, and particularly in certain grade levels and subject areas.
All right, excellent. So I've been very eager to ask you the next question because as interesting as I find LinkIt to be, I really, really love Publi. First of all, Publi is a lot simpler for me to understand as a layman, but I just love the concept. Tell the people what Publi is and why you started that.
It came from an observation that I had and that others shared, which was the experience of digesting and engaging with children's books online was kind of boring. That most of the sort of digital delivery around what would typically be called picture books or heavily illustrated books for young children kind of ended up looking like a PDF. And the company that I was working with at the time of the sort of origins of Publi had a series of books that it wanted to take from print to digital. And the question was how to do that without losing some of the joy that was sort of inherent, the fun factor that was intrinsic to those books. And we ultimately decided that it made sense to start to build a set of tools, not just do a one-time project, but ultimately to create an ongoing mechanism to convert print-based books to more interactive, more engaging, in some cases, animated books that would preserve that joy, that would have the feeling of a classic children's book, but with enhanced features. Things like drag and drop and hotspots and voiceover, and you can touch on different areas or characters to sort of make the books come to life. So that really was the genesis and origin of Publi. As I said, kind of a different use case, but a similar concept in that there was sort of this perception of a problem that the current or existing systems or tools or processes wasn't really working well to meet ultimately the end goal, which was to inspire wonder in young children. And essentially that became the catalyst that launched the solution that became Publi, and now at publi.com, which is sort of a marketplace of resources produced using the Publi tools.
Now, having gone to the website and actually, participated in one of these books, I just really love the interactive nature of it. So correct me if I'm wrong, but all this interaction takes place, you have to have a computer or a tablet, right?
Well, for now, but we are actually, there is a project in place to launch an app that would ultimately allow Publis to be delivered via a phone. So not for long.
Now, this is specifically not a political podcast, but as someone who's, well-versed, obviously, in education and who has developed, these children's stories, here in Florida, we have a movement towards not telling certain stories in schools. And, when I think of Publi, I think of it as a potential outlet to have certain stories told that some would think they're not controversial at all. But certain stories that either they've become illegal to tell in classrooms, or the law is so vague that teachers are reticent to teach them in classrooms. Without getting to the specifics of certain politicians and the law itself, how do you feel about Publi possibly being a conduit for sharing certain stories that might otherwise not be shared? And do you think the government should kind of just let teachers decide?
Wow, a lot to unpack there. I mean, I'm not sure that from a Publi standpoint, we take a specific position on that.
I'm asking for your position, not just. Sorry, I should have been clearer. I'm asking what you.
Yeah, I think that while Publi is a resource that is, I think, in general appropriate for schools, we're really hoping that parents embrace it, and ultimately parents have control over the types of resources on Publi that they want to expose to their children, or that they want their children to be exposed to. Ultimately, they're kind of the payer and can select the resources that they believe are relevant and appropriate. So to the extent that there are stories there that students or children may not be exposed to in school, absolutely there would be a mechanism for parents to access some of that content on Publi. So I wouldn't say that that's explicitly what we're trying to do, but we are trying to empower parents and students themselves to engage with learning content in a way that, as I said, really does preserve the joy of learning. And whatever flows from that is sort of like we believe that's okay, that sort of inspiration and wonder is really what we're sort of putting paramount and holding in the sort of highest esteem.
Right. Well, my point was, perhaps it was inelegant the way I was trying to get to it, because I was trying to follow my own guidelines. But I just feel like there's flexibility there. I look at it kind of, you order HBO for the household, you can put on parental controls and things like that. But there's enough of a spectrum that you can decide what you want to offer or what you specifically don't want to offer to your kids for them to view and participate in. So,
yeah, and I think that's a totally reasonable analogy. right? So you're sort of bypassing this sort of all or nothing scenario, but you do have access to Publi as a subscription service. And ultimately, as a parent or as a teacher, you are acting as the curator, right? You are defining what it is that you want your students or your child or children to be exposed to on the Publi platform. And I think that's a reasonable approach that allows for the appropriate level of self-determination.
Okay, great. So we're having this conversation, sadly, in light of the unexpected passing of one of our classmates who was, I think, a year ahead of us. And I don't, let me just say that I don't want this question to be too macabre, but it struck me that the funeral took place in New York, and I was not able to attend, but you were there, and you were texting me about all the close friends that we have that showed up. They showed up, and it kind of was regardless of class. I mean, we all knew each other, right? And when you were rattling off names of people that were there, I was very heartened to know that because you and I obviously share so many of the same friends because of college, but also, it's just so interesting how many people we know that are in the upper echelons of all areas of industry, whether it be politics or media or tech or entertainment. I mean, all kinds of things. So I'm bringing up a sad moment to get to a broader question, which is, in moments like that, or are there other moments where, to us, going to Harvard was just college? And I'm asking you this because I haven't had a guest that I can ask this question to before, okay? So going to Harvard to us was just we went to college. That's where we went to college. But are there ever moments like that or other times where it really strikes you that people that we see on TV on an almost damn near daily basis, these are just our friends, and what it meant to go to that school? Does it ever hit you?
It does, and obviously,
I hope you're laughing with me and not
I'm
at
just
me.
thinking about it because it absolutely does. And while there's no sort of counter narrative because we don't know what would have happened had we gone to another school, I always feel, I think, both a sense of pride and humility when we see some of the success and notoriety that our classmates or near classmates have achieved. It's quite humbling at times, and certainly rarefied air when we think of the humble beginnings in many cases.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that those humble beginnings are told amongst each other, and when the background. I mean, so many of our friends, are first generation immigrants or first generation children of immigrants. My parents came from Haiti, both of them, and there's stories like that. There's stories of people who came from slaves how many generations ago, and they're the first ones to even go to college, let alone Harvard. You have stories that we've heard from our friends, quietly throughout the years, and then you see them doing all these big things. It's a bit overwhelming and humbling at the same time. So yeah, I get it. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, and I think it's a great question, and it's something I probably don't explicitly think about it a lot, but as you're intimating, there are many of those moments on probably a weekly or at least a monthly basis where you can't help but take a step back and be a little bit in awe of what people accomplished, and many times not financially necessarily, but positions of great power and influence across any industry, whether it's media or academics or government, certainly finance and entrepreneurship as well. It really is a very I think diverse spectrum of accomplishments that people very close to us have been able to attain. And I think it certainly is another one of those factors that I think helps propel me forward and, to continue to on this entrepreneurial journey that I've been on, because there are so many great examples of people that have broken through that's exciting and gratifying on every level.
Definitely. I completely co-sign, brothers. 100%. Now, I purposefully avoided, for my sake, and because I don't know what would ever come out of your mouth, although we could also delete it, but I love my girlfriend very much. I don't want to, I purposely avoided talking about our years in South Beach. All I will say is this. I mentioned my girlfriend, Gigi, who, you've definitely elevated your status as my friend, because were it not for you, I wouldn't even know her, because I met her at your home on the 4th of July 15 years ago. So thanks for that, buddy. Let me just say that those were the best years of my life. It's kind of like when we used to watch the show Entourage. And even when I watch it now, it brings me joy and it brings me pain, because I'm like, yes, those are the good old days. But you get older and you move on and you evolve. But wouldn't you agree that those were some really good times without getting me in trouble?
Yeah, we had a lot of fun. There's no question about that. I mean, I think it was certainly a different time where the personal priorities were different, but the sort of camaraderie that was possible in that era was something that I look upon with a nostalgic sense of peace of mind. Let's say it was a good time that I remember fondly.
Yeah, definitely. As a matter of fact,
I do have a funny Gigi story, by the way.
Oh, which you're going to tell me offline, I assume, or right now?
I mean,
is this what is it? NSFT or NSFW?
No. I think it's appropriate.
All right, tell me immediately.
All right. Well, it was probably about 10 years ago, before you got together. I got a call from Gigi, and she said, Josh,
I don't like this already.
Well, this is maybe not going where you would imagine in your worst dreams. She said, it wasn't a late night call or anything, just a normal call.
All right.
And she said, Josh, I'm looking for a new job, and it would be great if you wouldn't mind helping me out and taking a look to kind of polish my resume. And I said, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. No problem." She's like, "It would mean so much to me." I'm like, "Well, why do you put it that way? I mean, as a friend, I'd be happy to do it, but why me?" She's like, "Well, I mean, because it's job oriented, and if the founder of LinkedIn reviewed my resume personally, it would just mean a lot." And that really cut me down to size, because I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Gigi, I'm not the founder of LinkedIn. I'm the founder of LinkIt. Two totally different things. I'm not sure if you still want me to review your resume, but I'm happy to do it if so. Otherwise, I understand if you want to seek a more qualified resume reviewer." So, she was, I think, quite amused by that, and I was, just a little bit humiliated. I really felt she was honestly seeking my advice, but turns out not so much.
Well, look how far you've come, buddy. Look how you've come.
And here we are.
Here we are, 10 years later. Wow. Did you end up reviewing her resume?
I believe that I did. Yes.
That's very kind of you. Co-founder of, not even founder. I just found out you're co-founder of LinkedIn.
Right. I'm a humble person.
That is true. Oh my God. Okay. All right. So, okay. That was well worth it. All right. So listen, man, one last question for you. Is there, and I'm going to ask this at my own risk, because you're the right person to ask. Is there anything that my listeners should know about me that they would otherwise not know? And watch it, because I know where you live.
Oh, let me see. Wow.
And also remember, I've got a lot in my vault. You don't want to.
Yeah. I think you know what? I think I'm going to tread very carefully here and say that listeners of this fine podcast, as you probably already know, this is actually something that they probably do know about you, that you are always going to call it like you see it, type of person that kind of wears your heart on your sleeve. And I think from a listening standpoint, I mention that because, I really don't have a more trusted and reliable friend than I have in you. And then, not to be corny, but I feel like your listeners undoubtedly benefit from your thoughtfulness and candor and unwillingness to sugarcoat things. You're well positioned for this role and sort of bringing issues and interesting stories to light. Gerard, I'm sure your audience is already aware of that, so I don't think I'm saying anything new there.
Well, I really appreciate that, buddy. And obviously the feeling's more than mutual. That's why I feel, among many, many other reasons.
Well, there was that time we went to the club and, well.
Okay. All right. I think you're getting disconnected because that could lead to an immediate breakup. So actually, I don't even have to say might. But no, listen. In all seriousness, feelings more than mutual, buddy. And you've been there for me in ways that that are so above and beyond. My kindness to you is only just to find some way to try to repay you at some point. And our compatibility is pretty bonkers. And so I could say the same to you. So I appreciate that without getting too emotional. Moving on to business. Before we go, do you have any events or anything else coming up you want to promote while you're here with me on the mic?
Nothing explicitly, Gerard, but certainly if you're in the business or the vocation of education, if you're a teacher, if you're an administrator, and you care about understanding and using data, I'd love for you to check out linkit.com, get a better sense of the work that we're doing around making that data more accessible, more relevant, and ultimately more actionable. So check out linkit.com, linkit.com. And if you're a parent at home looking for quality educational materials that are going to keep kids engaged, certainly publi.com is a great place to go. We'd love your feedback on either front. So thanks for the opportunity. And thanks for the questions. Some hard-hitting stuff here.
Yeah, I do my best. And but before I forget, obviously we're going to include those links in the show notes. Is there any other anything else you want to share about where people can find either LinkIt or you or Publi on social media?
No, I mean we are on social media, on LinkedIn, but the best place to go is just our actual website. So.
Okay, you mean the company that you did not found? LinkedIn.
Yes.
LinkedIn. No.
That's correct. Yes. Okay. I had nothing to do with the founding of LinkedIn, just to be clear.
All right.
Although I am a user. So.
Yes, you are definitely a user. No, that was a joke.
You know what, Gerard?
Okay. Look, you know what? You and I are like always in a Mexican standoff because neither one of us can ever like actually piss the other off because we have too many goods on the other one. So let me just say I'm sorry. And let's end it.
Apology accepted.
All right, man. Thanks. Look, I really appreciate it. I was looking forward to it, but it was even more fun than I imagined. So I thank you very much, and I look forward to us actually getting to physically hang out together soon. I probably need to take another trip up there soon, or get your ass down here, man. Let's hang out. We can't do it like the old days, but
Yeah, I'll make it happen. I'll bring my cane.
And on that note, I can't top that. So, all right, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate you.
All right, take care.
First of all, for all y'all podcasters out there, people who love podcasts, let me tell you, podcasting is such a beautiful medium for so many reasons. But it has given me the opportunity to interview my best friend. And I'm not trying to, annoy my other, I'm so blessed to have so many amazingly close friends out there. So I'm not trying to annoy anybody else out there in the ether who might be listening to this. But my point is that Josh knows me better than anyone else on earth, period. And I'm talking about family members, my own sister, who's the producer of this show. He knows more about me than anyone on earth. Some people come in a close second. I'll give you that. But podcasting has allowed me to bring him on the show and learn even more about him where previously I thought I knew damn near everything, right? I'm thrilled. I think you could see how happy I was to interview him. And we also got into some, serious topics with respect to education and a lot of topics relating specifically to Florida. And I think all of that is great. And as you've noticed, there continues to be a through line with so many of our guests, which is entrepreneurialism and how to take an idea and make it a reality, and how to make a living off of that. And it was very special to me that we got to talk about children and education. I got to learn about the FCAT, which I've never had to take, and his motivations behind doing what he's done. He's got such a good soul, such a good heart. And let me tell you, the homeboy is brilliant. And I'm proud to say that all my friends are brilliant. It's kind of like being brilliant is just a through line with all of my friendships, particularly because I made the vast majority of my closest friendships at Harvard. So it's like, yeah, okay, they're all super smart. That's like a given, right? But then they're also mad cool. And when all of your closest friends are super smart, and that's just a given, so you can, talk about 90s hip hop 1 second and Nietzsche the next, that's a blessing, which I guess I have to thank my dad for tricking me to applying to go there, which we've talked about in past episodes. Yeah, he really did trick me because I had no desire to apply to that school. But anyway, I digress. You heard the interview. You can take from it inspiration with respect to, how to help society, how to help children, how to take an idea that you have and turn it into a way for you to make a living. Okay. So I could talk about that during my fresh take, but I'd rather talk about something that's specific to having Josh particularly as my guest, which is, like I said, my dad tricked me into going to Harvard, and it wasn't until much later that I saw the wisdom in that decision. It's so mind-blowing to go to a school, and in your mind, you're just going to college, right? But it really was enlightening, fulfilling, challenging, inspiring to just meet other students day to day that are consistently super, super smart. And you're surrounded by this. And I think it's also the first time. I mean, I went to, some of the most prominent private schools in Florida. So I was always around smart kids. But now you're completely immersed. The intelligence is just top notch. And it's like a nice warm bath, right? And it also gave me the opportunity to, for the first time in my life, I can say that I met some kids there that I would say that are actual geniuses. Like, this person might change the world or invent something. Now, it was my experience that some of them, the geniuses, like genius levels, they were mad awkward. Okay. They were really, really socially awkward, but they were like next level. Okay. Whereas, I loved having friends that were super smart, like take Josh and me. I mean, there's certain things that clearly he's even smarter than me on. And there's certain things that I think I'm more well-versed in than him. But at the end of the day, there's such a high level of intelligence with all my friends. And these are the same people that I can go out and party with. These are the same people that I can pour out my heart emotionally to. These are the same people that I see on TV doing big things, or I'm reading about it in the news or on social media, that are just doing things in all areas of society, as we mentioned, whether it be politics, entertainment, medicine. I mean, anything you want to think of. I don't really end up thinking about that a lot. So the only time my father ever deceived me in my entire life was a strategy that has likely changed the trajectory of my bloodline for generations, because he convinced me to do something for the benefit of myself that I would have not otherwise done. Had it not been for my dad tricking me, I would have never met Josh. I would have never met my other best friends who I could rattle off super easily. And that's something to appreciate. And thank the stars for, and also to thank my dad for, and thank you to my mom for marrying that dude. But we know who at the end of the day chased whom, right? Right, mommy? Okay. And I'll just close with this, and maybe just something for you a little nugget for you to think about. What is true friendship? I think sometimes people try to define love, and people have different definitions of love, etc. But I've always found the definition of friendship to be pretty simple. I've always said the same thing. A true friend is someone who's willing to do for you what you're willing to do for them. For me, it's that simple. That might be to sit and listen to you. That might be to help you if you're in a tough financial situation. That could be honesty. It could be anything. But that's a true friend. And Josh Powe, is a true friend. And every day, I try to be a better friend to him because he's been there for me in more ways than anybody knows. And he's not the only one. And for that, I am extremely, extremely blessed. Thank you for listening. Please tune in to the next episode of the Fresh Mix podcast. I'm so glad you tuned in this week. There is more to come. All right. For details and show notes about today's show and our guests, go to freshmixpodcast.com. The Florida Podcast Network has a closed Facebook group exclusively for super fans of their shows. Just search for FPN Insiders on Facebook to leave us comments, get early scoops, contests, and other special treats. Or you can just complain about how Florida, let's just say I've worked in New York and lived in New York, and I've also worked extensively in Florida. And this is going to be a generalization and perhaps a stereotype, but Florida takes business a little bit more lax. Maybe we could do a little bit better with the professionalism down here in Florida, y'all. And I have seen some dramatic improvements, particularly with respect to the development of the business areas downtown and other places. We need to step it up as far as our corporate culture. I think we're on the right path, okay? But, let's get more serious about, how we treat people in the workplace and showing up on time, getting projects done on time, and that type of thing. All right, come on, Florida. We can do it. We got this. All right. And be sure to visit all the great shows on FloridaPodcastNetwork.com. Keep catching Who's Fresh in the Florida Mix with Florida's Fresh Mix podcast.